From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good afternoon. This is the opening of the 10th community meeting of the INDIP community. So, welcome. I am Martha Anderson. I'm the director of the National Digital Information Infrastructure and Preservation Program at the Library of Congress, and most of you know that as INDIP. And I won't say anything more about that, but we are so glad to have you here. This is probably a record crowd for us. I think we have around 260 registrants, and we are just thrilled to have what I think of in terms of an old song I learned in Brownies, new friends and old. Some are silver and the other is gold. It's just great. This is such a nice mix of new members to the community and the members who have been with us from the very beginning. So we're very, very happy to have you here. You will have to accept me as a substitute for the Deputy Librarian of Congress, who we had invited to speak, and he was on this schedule, and at the last minute had to cover something for the Librarian of Congress. His name is Robert Dysard. You may have heard that he was recently appointed to the position. He is a friend of this program. He was part of the team that wrote the original INDIP plan that went to Congress for approval. So he knows who we are at our roots, and I think from the standpoint of the library, we are very happy to have him in that position. Before the days of ambient geolocation, I was traveling in West Tennessee with my family one hot summer. We were on Interstate 40, and we were seeking our way to a family reunion in West Tennessee. We got off the highway at this exit, and turned out that we had stopped at a place called Bucksnort, Tennessee. And it was a convenience store and a adult video parlor. And so we went into the convenience store, and we said, "Can you tell us if we're on the right path to get to Union City, Tennessee?" And the boy behind the counter said, "Well, I've been there, but I don't know how I got there." So I thought we should think a little bit about how did we get here today after 10 years. And as I think about it, I think the qualities of this community, both individually and organizationally, have brought us to this point. We have, everyone in this room represents leadership in some way. You may not think you're leading, but you really are. You're embarking upon activities that are emergent, they're not fixed, they're not totally solidified yet, and you're brave to step out there. So each of you can think of yourself as a pioneer. This year, in our second year for the National Digital Stewardship Alliance, we have 128 members and 3 more in process right now. The NDSA is an initiative of the INDIP program, so it is at the heart of what we do today at the library. The second quality is generosity. This group shares their knowledge, their expertise, and their experiences, and we hear that over and over again from all of you as you do your work. And the third characteristic is commitment. You take the risk, you advocate for this, and you take action early on behalf of content that is at risk. You develop processes, you develop communities around the content, and even we just met with some of our newest members, to gain their wisdom about how to make them more productive early on. And I was struck by the fact that they come seeking to add new dimensions to this work, but also to leverage the work that has gone before. When the National Digital Stewardship Alliance was formed 2 years ago, we had a constitutional convention. And about 40 organizations joined together to put together some operating principles, some value statements, and a mission statement. And I just thought we should be reminded of the values today. They are stewardship, collaboration, inclusiveness, and exchange. And stewardship means we care about that content that represents our nation's cultural, scientific, scholarly, and business heritage. Collaboration means we recognize the value of community and the ability to leverage the assets and the expertise of the community. Inclusiveness means that we are trying to have a diverse community. Our friend from the UK who visited us a couple of years ago, William Kilbride, he's with the Digital Preservation Coalition. At our meeting, he said, "I just didn't realize that you were about more than universities." And that's true. We have a broad spectrum of different kinds of organizations, and we to continue to diversify that spectrum. And then exchange, this open exchange of ideas, services, software. And I think that is the key to increasing the capacity for digital preservation in the country and around the world, actually. So in the spirit of the NDSA values, I'd like you to take full advantage of the opportunities available to you in the next couple of days. Take this conference back to your colleagues who can't be here. Tweet about the conference. I think that adds so much that there are people out there. I noticed early this morning, there are all sorts of people anticipating seeing tweets about this conference, so try to fulfill their hopes. But pay attention to the journey. Know how you got there. And so, without further ado, I will turn this over to Bill Lafergie, who will be our MC for the day and introduce our special speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha. Well, let me second Martha's welcome. It's so good to see you all back here again. Many people who we've been working with for a number of years, some of you actually going back to the very beginning of when NDIP got underway, and others who are perhaps here for the first time. We'd like to see you as well. And we're really hoping to be able to expand the group of people and institutions that we work with as part of NDIP. And in terms of our annual meetings, what we've been trying to do for the last number of those meetings is bring together some exciting speakers who represent different sectors. They are not of the digital preservation community, but they have a deep interest and appreciation for the issues that our community cares about. And we are really, really fortunate this year to have 4 just excellent speakers who can address topics and issues that we all care deeply about, and I think will probably be able to give us a different perspective from those that we already hold, which is already very useful for expanding our own awareness and our own perspectives. First up is Anil Dash, who is a major thought leader for the tech industry. And he's one of those rare people who can be a thought leader from the perspective of an entrepreneur as well as someone who is an activist for social equity. I can do no better than to use a description that he uses to describe himself, which goes in part, "I'm an entrepreneur, writer, and geek, obsessed with the ways that technology shapes and transforms culture, media, government, and society." My work applies to the techniques and innovations of tech startups, to reinventing institutions and communities, and my writing tells the story of how this happens. Now, we first thought to invite Anil here in connection with ThinkUp, which is the business he runs with Gina Trapani. And as many of you know, ThinkUp is an open source web application that captures and allows creators to keep their activity in social media networks. And some of the values behind ThinkUp that Anil has mentioned is that meaningful conversations are important, people's self-expression is valuable and worth preserving, and good tools can impact culture in a positive way. And I'm sure we can all agree with those values here. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to Anil.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate that kind introduction. So many of you may not know, you have fans in the lay community that are not experts at what you do, but appreciate and admire it. So first I want to start by saying thank you for having me here, but also thank you for the work you do. There are a lot of us that are ordinary citizens that see it and appreciate it and pay attention to it and care about it, and you might not get to hear that perspective often enough. So I wanted to start there. I wanted to also offer a brief explanation. I think some of the materials have said I was at Expert Labs before today talking about being at ThinkUp. And a little bit of that history is probably useful to understand the context. My background's in the tech industry. I've been a geek. I'm one of those guys that makes internet apps and was friends with the folks that went on to create Twitter and Flickr and Blogger and Foursquare and I think Yancey from Kickstarter was here last year speaking to a lot of you folks. And these are all people that I kind of came up with as peers, and they've all done very well, which is great. And it's nice when you go to visit their house. But for me, what I was very interested in was what the social impacts would be and how our community of tech creators would interact with the policy world, with government, and with social good. And so we started a nonprofit about 3 years ago called Expert Labs, and the mission was to broadly increase the number of people in the public at large that were engaging with policymakers and lawmakers around public policy using social networks. But the technique by which we did that, and the thing we strongly advocated for, was simply recording the conversations, capturing conversations that happen in social media between institutions such as legislators and policymakers in the executive branch and other parts of government, and recording the conversations they had with their constituents would change the nature of that dialogue. I still believe that today. The tools we built out of that effort were a platform called ThinkUp, which is why the company I work on now is called ThinkUp. But I offer that as preface because what I want to reflect back to you today is the perspective I've seen from being inside the tech industry, sitting at tables like these and conferences like these with the people that make these software tools, these revolutionary technology tools. And I want to, before we do anything else, before any other part of this conversation, let you know about what the problems are, what the challenges are, what the issues are that you confront every day that they are not aware of, don't know, don't have ingrained in their culture, and sometimes miss out on. So at least at the beginning of this conversation and first things I talk about, this is going to be, if not depressing, certainly challenging. Don't despair, there's a reason for it. But I want to start there, and I want to start with you picturing the wholesale destruction of your wedding photos. Now, my sister works in library science. Like, I know you don't want to start with this image, but I want you to think about this. And maybe it's your baby pictures. Maybe it's the last recordings of the band you were in when you're in college. Whatever it is, really, really picture it. That these moments, these artifacts, these recordings of important moments in your life, not great cultural documents, not the lofty things that we try to talk about a lot that we're going to preserve, but the ordinary moments in life. Picture these moments, the records you have of them being destroyed. And the ones responsible for it is a secretive, private Ivy League club, and members of whom you don't know that are unclear to you. This is what I see Facebook as being. Facebook was created as a secretive, private Ivy League club. This is fact, right? It's exclusively for members of that school, designed to share photos, and they treat content as disposable. That's the truth today. I'm not ascribing malice to it. If I were 25 years old and a billionaire, maybe I would have a short-term view of the world too. But this is the reality we have today. And the reason for it is because of the terms of service that you agree to when you use Facebook or any of the other popular social networking services. Today, in ordinary life, for how people interact with their fellow citizens, terms of service in digital social networks trumps the Constitution in terms of what's putting constraints on the ways people can create, and the ways people can connect with one another, and how they can share and consume. We obviously have great, wonderful First Amendment rights in public speech and in our interactions with one another. We abdicate those when we let a private company be the intermediary for how we connect with our friends. And one of the implications of that is that all of those ordinary conversations are allowed to be treated as disposable. And all of these services, if it's Twitter, Facebook, if it's Google, if it's Microsoft, any of these companies, any of these services, explicitly says, we may delete any or all of your content at any time, with or without notice, for any reason, or we can just modify it. So maybe we'll just touch up your photos of your kid or of your wedding or whatever else you have. And for the most part, we've all accepted that. Hundreds of millions of Americans have accepted that. That should be troubling to those of us that care about preservation. And the first thought we have is, well, why don't we just not use them? Right? Can't we just opt out? How many of you today could really, truly do your job and participate in your career, look at how your career advances, without being on any of these social networks, without LinkedIn, without Facebook, without Twitter? Brave move. I like that. The analog gentleman in the front is very appreciated. But isn't that a strong statement? Is I certainly know my career would be compromised if I put a stake in the ground and said, I'm not on Facebook. It would probably be seen as this sort of momentary eccentricity. It's like, oh, he's got some weird food thing, right? Like he's not going to be on Facebook. But this is a real issue. This is something we have to be very, very mindful of, is we cannot effectively opt out without having severe social costs, without having severe career costs, without having just friction of, well, what do you mean you came to Thanksgiving dinner and didn't know your cousin had a kid because she told everybody on Facebook, right? That's life. That's life today. And then the other usual defensive mechanism we trigger when we say, wow, things are locked down on Facebook, things are locked down on LinkedIn. Well, that's only some of the web, right? We have all this great content on .gov sites, on our .edu sites. This is where it gets tricky. Because, and I don't mean to resort to hyperbole here, but I want to make the stakes clear, there is a war going on against that open web, the rest of the web, the parts of the web that are not contained within the timeline on Tumblr and Twitter and Facebook. They are actively trying to subsume. First thing you have to understand is the behaviors of people on the web today in the United States. The majority of time spent on the web in the United States is spent within what I'd call an application experience, which is to say within the news stream on Twitter or Tumblr or Facebook or Gmail, and not on web pages. So think of the web as pages versus streams. Streams are the ones controlled by the big networks. Pages are the things that everybody else in the world is making, and pages are now the minority of time spent by Americans on the web. And how many of us in this room are still archiving web pages? So that's a problem. And it's worse than that. They are gaslighting the web. If you know the great classic film, Gaslight, the concept here is essentially an abusive spouse that gradually dims the lights, the gas lights in the house over and over, all the while telling his poor wife, no, things haven't gotten dimmer, you're going blind. And I chose this metaphor carefully because what Facebook has done is, I took my blog as an example, but it's just one of what anybody could do. I have Facebook comments on my site. They power the widget that powers the conversations on my site, like a lot of the web. I had to put their open graph tags on my site in order to enable that. So they've got metadata about me. They know who I am. I've declared that I'm an author. I've done a lot of work with them to do a two-way connection so they know who I am. So I've embraced their ecosystem. I've registered with them. I've embraced their community features on my site. And then when people click through from their Facebook timeline to come to my blog post that has Facebook comments on it, they get a please be careful warning. For the safety and privacy of your Facebook account, it goes on to say that this guy's probably not trustworthy. Now, I don't do that when I link from my site to Facebook, even though we know they've consistently shifted the goalposts about privacy over and over and over again. So if I've extended them that courtesy, couldn't they do the same for me after I've registered with them? But they don't do that. This warning never comes up when you read a site like, say, the Washington Post, which has that social reader that you see spamming your timeline in Facebook. Right? So when they agree to have their content live within Facebook's walls, away from the places that all of us are archiving, there is no warning. Now, I posted about that on my blog a while ago, and because I'm a loudmouth in the tech world, they actually listened to it a little bit. And one of their engineers emailed me privately and said, oh, you know, it was a bug. It wasn't supposed to throw that warning. We're really sorry. We'll fix it. You know what? I believe him. Software is hard. Nobody's ever made software for 1 billion people before. But what if I hadn't caught it? Or what if I'd caught it and been busy that day? Or what if I caught it and hadn't been busy but didn't feel like fixing a bug for a multi-billion-dollar publicly traded corporation that doesn't pay me? Do any of you have budget that you've been allocated for fixing bugs in Facebook? Because I haven't. So the best case scenario, if we don't ascribe malice to it, if we say that they're just, oh shucks, they make mistakes, they're human. The best case scenario is we are left fixing their bugs. That's pretty awful, right? Because they're not fixing our bugs. They're not helping us deploy our technology or our software. And we're helping them with extending their privilege over the rest of the web. So there's wonderful work being done even by teams in this room around archiving Twitter and archiving different social networks. And it's great. It's important work that has to happen. But when I, as a member of the public system, my words are important. Occasionally they are. Sometimes it's not just tweeting about what I had for lunch. Sometimes I'm trying to say something meaningful. I want those things to be preserved by the Library of Congress. Do I have to agree to those terms of service and put my words in those constraints in order to be deemed worthy of being archived by the institution that my tax dollars fund? Is that the only way in? That's a big question. That's a hard question. That scares the hell out of me. I've been blogging 13 years. I've written the better part of 1 million words on my site. I've probably had 1 million people read it over the course of those 13 years. I've never been paid $1 to do it. I've made a couple dollars maybe total in 13 years doing it. And when my son was born last year, I realized this is the life's work I'll hand him. If he can deal with the boredom of doing so, he may even read it and say, this is who my dad was. And I'll offer him an archive of it. I'm trying to be meticulous about making sure that I preserved it. But our culture and our decisions we've made as a society are that it is not as worthy of preservation, and the millions of other blogs like it, as the content being created within these few networks where we give up our rights to a lot of forms of expression when we use them. That should be problematic. That should be troubling. We should be concerned about that. And then there's the bigger issues, which is that's just about the web. We can get to the web. We can't get to apps, right? All of this content's being shared. You've all done this on your smartphones, taken pictures, shared them out, uploaded it. We can't crawl my phone and archive that, right? The administrators of a lot of your agencies can remotely erase your device for you. What does that mean when you have personal pictures on that device? And when Facebook buys Instagram, and we look at every single other acquisition Facebook's ever made, and we say, Instagram has 1 billion photos, and approximately 5% of all the content ever created from every other acquisition Facebook has ever made is still available to the public. 95% of it's been deleted. What path is Instagram on? Best case, maybe they get folded into Facebook itself and fall under those same terms of service. But it wouldn't be that much of a shock if they said, you have a couple days to migrate your stuff. Maybe you have a couple weeks to migrate your stuff. And then we're going to kill all this content too. And that's what's considered success in Silicon Valley. Everybody's happy for the Instagram kids. They made $1 billion. So there's this broader point about ordinary people's words, right? If you have enough of an audience, you don't need to worry about whether your words will be etched into stone tablets. If you have a high enough position, you'll be taken care of. But I'm very, very concerned with the ordinary conversations that we don't yet know are remarkable. The documentation of our everyday life that we find out in retrospect was something truly amazing. And I'm concerned at the technical level, that we focus on the wrong things. If I ask this room, what's the most common format for presenting video to people on the internet, what would you say? Guesses? MPEG and Flash. I think it's animated GIFs. I do. I think more people watch silent films in the form of animated GIFs than watch any other form of video that's ever existed. And our tools for archiving it suck. They're terrible. They drop the animation. This is what our culture has said we like, right? We laugh about it, we joke about it. But if you ask any 20-year-old, do you watch more movies in the theater or do you watch more animated GIFs? It's not close. And we don't have good tools for grabbing them, right? So we're still in this old world where we're talking about kind of the wrong problems. We do this with open formats too. We say, well, shouldn't you use OGG Vorbis for your audio instead of MP3 because of the patent issues, right? These super nerdy conversations go on. And the reality is the only formats that are actually going to be supported over the long term is the ones that are used a lot, regardless of what the patent issues are around them or the intellectual property issues are around them or how proprietary they are. The proprietary formats win if they have more users. So this is a really big technical challenge. Parallel to this is we're wrong about the formats broadly, about what we should be paying attention to. So we have a lot of information being published out in non-standard formats. This goes well beyond the can you copy and paste from a PDF issue, but into EPUB and eBooks and all the variations of this. It's really complicated. It's getting more complicated. And we think the onus is on us to try and keep all those plates spinning. We need to start to reflect the conversation back to the technology community that they have an obligation to accommodate preservation. This is their obligation because, among all the other things, besides all the other privileges they share, they have more resources than us. They've got all the money in the world. Shouldn't they be bearing some of this responsibility? There's a big issue here, too, where we're losing metadata like crazy. So, there's a common refrain in Silicon Valley about people abandoned Flickr and all went to Instagram. And the cost here is you can't find an Instagram photo on the web. They're not linked anywhere. Maybe they'll solve this, but today you can't find them. There's 1 billion photos that have gone through that service that have no web presence, let alone the things we take for granted. All the images in this presentation are Flickr Creative Commons searches, just like you've all done. They're all really well meta-tagged, and it's very easy to discover content. They've got good geocoding, and if they didn't, I could assign it to the photos for them. Right? Really, really robust metadata systems around it. None of that exists in Instagram, and the kids that made it are already multi-hundred millionaires. They're not going to go back and fix that bug. They're picking islands to purchase. Right? So, best case, if some really motivated young engineer at Facebook gets, a bug, and says, I really want to fix this, and she's great at it, we get the same level of metadata we have in Flickr today on Instagram photos, perhaps 5 years from now. So we've lost a full decade of people's participation in information that's discoverable and shareable and easy to repurpose and all these other things that we value. There is no way to assign open rights for sharing and archiving to an Instagram photo today. It's 1 billion photos lost. It gets worse. The same companies, especially the ones that make devices like Google and Apple, are working very hard to enforce the DRM within their devices. So it is illegal to hack your Blu-ray player in order to be able to copy movies. It's illegal to hack the rights management on your iPod or your iPhone to be able to copy movies. And they're moving more and more of the content shared through their ecosystems in those apps into the same rights management systems. It will be illegal to copy your own data off of your own device for many types of content perhaps the majority of types of content, on most of the devices people start to use when everybody's moved to the smartphone era. So without going through their systems and routing it through their software, I can't copy my own photos from one device to another without breaking their rules. What problem does this present for our archiving challenges going forward? We think it's hard now. And that's with content that's designed to be shared on the web. Last bit of bad news. Even if those devices are open to support copying content, those devices become obsolete. If it's software designed for an old MS-DOS computer, we know those issues. Those things are familiar. But the device obsolescence cycle is getting faster. There's a new iPhone every year, right? And the Android phones from Google are even faster than that. So that cycle in which the devices become obsolete is moving faster and faster. So this fortunately concludes the doom and despair portion of the festivities. But just to kind of sanity check so far, how many of you have heard an issue or a warning or a concern in this conversation today that you hadn't thought about yet? Show of hands. There's a lot of pieces of it, but just something where you're like, there's an aspect. That's good. But most of you, you've thought of these pieces, right? The reason I want to reflect them back to you is because right now, the people who are building these tools, who are building these software and social networking communities, just aren't informed. They're not malicious. They're not bad people. I want to be careful. I'm not maligning their character. I'm happy for their success. But they don't know about the work you do. They don't know about the values of this community. They don't yet know why what you do is meaningful. In many cases, because they're very young, they don't yet have those perspectives of great life moments, like having a wedding or a kid or something else that introduces that bit of perspective where you start to say, maybe I want to record this and save it. Maybe I have to confront my own mortality. These are very great clarifying things if you're in the preservation business. They are not great clarifying moments that naturally happen in Silicon Valley. The good news is, the way the web works is by making copies of things. This is its nature. So at a fundamental base level, at the very least, if we can encourage things to be on the web, we start to win. And this is an important thing to keep in mind because there's a lot of conversation about apps versus web. I'm sure a lot of you are also on project teams that are building apps right now. It's an important thing to think about. It doesn't mean don't do apps, but it means make sure that app is powered by a web experience, connected to a web experience. And start to think about, from a very pure tactical standpoint, what does it mean that every time you view a web page, you're copying it? How can we take advantage of that? How can we look at the infrastructure that exists around speeding up the web for caching and storing information and leverage that for the purposes of preservation? If companies like Akamai and these other companies that do these huge networks, Amazon does this, of copying content all over the world in order to make it faster to access, they're doing a lot of work of preservation for us. They just don't know it yet. Can we reach out to the private sector and partner with them on this? How do we start to think about that? There's also a growing class of apps that want to do the right thing. They're motivated because they are looking for meaning in all this noise in the social networks. I would count our efforts at ThinkUp among this, and that's the sort of self-congratulatory part. But I look at something like this, these kids in New York doing an app called Time Hop. And it's just it's an email service of all things, very old-fashioned. But you hook it up to your Foursquare and your Twitter and whatever else, and all it does is send you a simple email to say, 1 year ago, here's what you tweeted, and here's where you checked in on Foursquare. And for me, the past several months have been, my kid's about 1.5 years old, so the last 6 months have all been firsts. And the first time he went to the park, and the first time he went on the subway, and the first time he did all these different things. Now, those were fun to check in or take a photo of or tweet about at the moment, but reflected back in an email a year later, they become meaningful. These are putting a user experience, a consumer experience, around the work of preservation. These are revealing why the work that all of you do is so meaningful. They are doing the job of marketing the value of this community for you. They just don't know it yet. They think they're a tech startup. They're that too, but these are the dots that can be connected. There was another, and this is again an iPhone app, so I'm not being dogmatic about this. There's some values there. There's an iPhone app that came out. It's called Brewster, and Met the guy that made it for a minute, but it's an address book. But it hooks up to all those other address books that you have on all the different social services and gives you a nice sort of experience around when's the last time you interacted with that person, when's the last time you called her, when's the last time you emailed him. This is a tool of preservation, and we need to think of it that way. And again, they don't realize that they're not just building a hot startup that's going to get lots of funding and sell to Facebook. They're building a tool of preservation that has an obligation to a community like yours to connect with you and learn how to share knowledge and ideas. And then there's a wide open space. And full disclosure, this is hopefully some of what we solve at ThinkUp, but this is the thing that I think all of us need to think about is how do we mine our archives, our personal archives, our own activity in the digital realm and get meaning from it, insights about us. I have this thing I wear that's a Nike fuel band. It tracks how far I walk in a day or run, if I run. I'm a commuter guy, I don't run that much. And what it does is reveals back to me how active I am. We don't think in terms of this sort of passive capture of data as the majority of our task in preservation today. But it may simply be because we don't know the meaning of it yet. Right? We may be able to extract meaning from that tells us more about ourselves. And there's an enormous community of people in the quantified self movement that are looking at all different kinds of sensors for tracking and recording what we do. They too are preservationists, and they don't know it. Build those bridges. Talk to them. And then the heavy hitters. The thing that all of you have access to is the authority of the institutions and the edifices that you represent. People revere the name, the Library of Congress. You don't realize it because a lot of you get to go in the building. A lot of you get to wear that. You get to wear that on your name badge. But it's taken very, very seriously. You know, I've had friends, very senior people at Twitter, kind of speak in hushed voice when they say, well, you know, the tweets go to the Library of Congress. They don't even know really what it means, right? They're just like, but it sounds awful serious. And that's a great thing. Because when you call somebody, when you email somebody from an @loc.gov email address, there's an authority of the institution behind it. Use that authority. Take advantage of it. Don't be shy to say, hey, you've got all the money in the world and all the tweets in the world or all the Facebook status updates in the world or all the photos in the world. Would you meet us halfway? By the way, look at my cool email address. These things work because people respect the institution, because there's been careful stewardship of the institution for a long, long time. And then there's power in this, which is that your voice of asking people to do the right thing, public relations, can trump whatever their terms of service are. It doesn't matter that they say they won't let you archive, they won't give you access. You can say, I'm with the Library of Congress. I'm with an institution that cares about stewardship. A brief anecdote from our time at Expert Labs. One of the things our tool did in engaging with the public around policy was archive the White House's social graph on Facebook, just to have a record of it, because, you know, Records Act, you want to make sure to know who is talking to the president. And at the time, Facebook's terms of service forbid archiving your social graph for more than 24 hours. Meanwhile, the Presidential Records Act required, to our reading, archiving your social graph for more than 24 hours. And I said, please, Facebook, please cut off the White House Facebook account. I would love to see this conversation happen. Unfortunately, I think they had already planned to revise that policy, so either they blinked or they were doing the right thing anyway. But can you imagine what a great conversation we would have gotten to have about the role of preserving public dialogue? Start stirring up those hornets' nests that way. Start having those conversations, saying, your terms of service preclude us doing the work of the people. How are you going to fix it? You can be nice about it. You don't have to be confrontational about it. But raise the questions. You have the authority to do so. I would even argue, as a member of the public who doesn't get to talk to you very often, you have the obligation to do so. You are our advocates. You're the only ones who can save all of that stuff I've created. Because they're not going to listen to me, even though I'm a loudmouth tech guy. I don't have the authority of the institution that you all do. And this parallels directly the way that the public is reckoning with intellectual property broadly. If I told you 1 million young people are going to get together and publicly violate intellectual property laws because they feel the rules around copying don't reflect their understanding of how society and culture should work and what's good for them, would you believe it? Because it happens every day. We don't look at YouTube as a million mixers march, but that's what it is. Any other form of civil disobedience where people say, I know what the federal law is, I choose to ignore it, I do it publicly with my real identity in a visible way where all the world can see, would be recognized for what it is, which is civil disobedience. These are the people who are inclined to support you. Now, you might say, oh, the people uploading Brady Bunch episodes of YouTube I don't want as my friends. I can understand that. But think more broadly of these are people that understand the value of recording aspects of culture that would disappear otherwise. Sony Music will not, for any amount of money today, sell me the making of Michael Jackson's Thriller video that I loved when I was 9 years old. He's the biggest selling artist the last 2 or 3 years running, and I can't buy it from them on DVD or Blu-ray or on iTunes, anywhere else. But I bet there's a copy of it on YouTube. Now, put aside, there's serious legal issues there. I'm not trying to diminish that. But the heart and soul of that person's motivation is preservation. Right? These are people that want to be your allies. Understand that everybody that's ever uploaded something to preserve it on YouTube, on SoundCloud, on Flickr, on anywhere else, are your allies, and they want to be advocates for you. You just need to be galvanized. All they want to do is the crux of what you do. They want to make a copy of what matters to them. I hope you'll give us all the chance to do that. And I really can't thank you enough for the work that you all do every day. I just want to hope that a little bit of this perspective gives you the clear, pointed view into the challenge we face from the technology sector where they don't yet know how to help you. You need to teach them. Thank you. I think we're tight on time for questions, but hopefully after David's done, maybe we'll get some time to do some Q&A.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.